Could we sharpen our discussion of the theoretical issues by taking some practical examples, ones that we think work and ones that we think are dismal failures? Because I think that would make the conversation much more concrete. I mean, Steve, you were one of the architects of the sanctuary movement and wrote some of the core documents. Could you talk about what worked about that, and why can't we emulate that 20 years later?
Yeah, and I think, listening to what people are saying about sameness and difference, I mean, it seems to me that gets at some of the issue that I think is so difficult at the moment, which is that the one thing that really works with some of the movements that one can point to in the past, and by the way, I should clarify that what I was saying about the whole September 11th attack wasn't that it was simply, I wasn't suggesting it was cowardice that led the churches not to say anything. It's just that the issues became too complicated to address in a confident, prophetic way, because here you have a tragedy occurring, a tragic attack occurring on U.S. soil, and all bets were off, not just because people were then afraid to oppose. There probably was some of the fear that you couldn't oppose a dramatic response to that, but it was also that, in fact, people didn't know what they were supposed to think about this event. I mean, it was a singularity in a way, and so when it wasn't just trivial when people said things have really changed, because nothing like that really had ever happened. I mean, Pearl Harbor was different because it was an attack on military targets very distant from the mainland. Nothing like that happened really since the Civil War, to be honest. I mean, so it was like more than 100 years had gone by without any kind of attack like that on U.S. Soil that was massively destructive of civilians and so on. So but I think what that points to is we're in an era of complexity and plurality and multiplicity of exactly the sort that Laurent has been describing that makes it hard to have a united voice on any subject. It was a convenient thing about the sanctuary movement, which is that it was something that everybody could get together around across denominational lines. I mean, it was not an expression of difference, it was an expression of commonality, because the issues appeared to be so clear-cut, because you could take a text from Leviticus about how, you're supposed to respond to the needs of the orphan and the widow, because, you were, and the sojourner, because you were a sojourner in the land of Egypt, and that captured people's imagination because it was so easy for all these different faiths and denominations to latch onto. So you could have, Hebrew congregations, you could have, Jewish synagogues participating together with multi-denominational churches. How often does something like that happen? It happened probably with the Civil Rights Movement. It happened with that. It happened with some of the anti-war movements, although, I'm always uneasy talking about the anti-war movement in Vietnam because of the way everybody fell silent once the draft was over. I mean, that's it gives you kind of a queasy sense of what was really going on with some of those things and the extent to which how deep the religious passions really were. So I guess all I want to say about that is the multiplicity that everybody now is pointing to works against the commonality of voice. In short, it works against prophecy. Maybe that's the simplest way to do it. I mean, how does the church have a prophetic voice? And maybe you don't want to have a prophetic voice anymore because it's incompatible, because it does, the prophets were unitary types. They were not into difference.
How were they unitary types?
Well, in other words, the prophets were pretty much opposed to. I think it's fair to say the mixing of cultures, the mixing of religions, the ornamentation. Just think of the rhetoric. What was it that Amos was talking about when he was talking about the luxuriating lifestyles of the rich, but also talking about the cows. I'm thinking the cows are exactly right. I mean, and it was it's pretty harsh. It has a pretty focused sort of disposition to it, and it certainly doesn't seem that he was interested in tolerating a lot of difference, or he was interested in hospitality. He was interested in separations, cleanly separating Israel from the cultures that surrounded it. That's what that seemed to be about. So that gives you a prophetic power that you don't have if you're saying, let's open the doors to everybody.
So why can't we do New Sanctuary? New Sanctuary is out there. It's been covered on the web. There are various movements, but it hasn't caught on the way that the sanctuary movement did catch on 20 years ago. Why?
Just the example of Amos makes me think of one of the things that I resonate with when I was a campus minister, we did Amos verse by verse. I was a Baptist campus minister, so verse by verse was just a hit with anything because it was the Bible. But one of the things I found everyone resonated with was there was no ambiguity that whatever convictions Amos had, he lived into passionately. And that was what resonated, even if they didn't understand the social critique or anything. That was the first thing that resonated with. And what I see missing in a lot of the mainline churches is people even having convictions they would get red in the face about. Or, oh, I'm against the war, but Lord knows I've never been arrested for anything. I've never even wrote a letter to my representative saying I'm uncomfortable paying the percentage of my taxes that went to the war in Iraq. And so, I understand the concern that Stephen has, but I think there's a sense in which a lot of Amos resonates with me, even though I'm okay sitting across from someone who engages in the same scripture and has a different answer than me. I just am overjoyed by the fact someone gets read about something and they have convictions, and I was okay as a campus minister talking to people who grew up in fundamentalist Southern homes saying, you know what, our prophetic act as part of this is we're going to go join the die-in run by mostly agnostics and atheists about the genocide in Rwanda, so we're all going to sit for an hour in the rain with black sheets over our head. And one of the most beautiful things that came out of that was a child of a fundamentalist Southern Baptist preacher daughter, who was not allowed to have a call to ministry, get up from it and say, Tripp, I got a call.
Yeah, cool.
God called me to stand up for the voice of people who've had black sheets over their heads. And that for me was a beautiful thing, and it had the Amos spirit, but didn't require the kind of sameness that if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of people obsessed with Reinhold Niebuhr want before they're allowed to say anything.
Yeah.